And while critics are slamming the president for not condemning the Russian meddling, President Trump is also firing back, and he's blaming former President Obama. He tweeted that as well, saying Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election. So why didn't he do something about Russian meddling? Also, all of these pose serious questions, of course. Do these indictments, in fact, vindicate President Trump as he suggests? And how should America effectively retaliate against Russia? I want to bring in my panel now. Deneen Borelli, Fox News contributor, also CRTV.com host. Ford O'Connell, CivicForumPac Chairman. Ryun, American Majority CEO, and Emily Jashinsky, a Washington Examiner commentary writer. Emily, you write about Washington, D.C. Everyone's up in arms about this, but for a variety of reasons. Certainly, we know so far that the Mueller probe has turned up no collusion. It has turned up no Americans. It has indicted no one in the Trump campaign. So is this a premature victory lap for President Trump?
He may see it that way, and I would say the enthusiasm with which he tweeted over the past few days would suggest that's the case. Of course, there's still things to be, worked out when it comes to Rick Gates, when it comes to Paul Manafort, when it comes to Carter Page. There are still things on the table, but I think what he's narrowing in and saying here is that when it comes to what is a hoax, it's the idea that his campaign was involved and that it wasn't, something where the Russians were out there doing what they're doing on their own without Americans getting involved in it.
Yeah, Ford, the mainstream media is so disingenuous. And, I've seen President Trump address this on more than one occasion. Obviously, their whole narrative was that President Trump's campaign colluded with Russia, not that they meddled in our elections and any of that stuff. And so to that degree, he's certainly been vindicated thus far, Ford.
No, he has. And I think the indictment was extremely good news for President Trump. But you have to understand something here, and that is that the Democrats and much of the mainstream media want to get Donald Trump, and they really don't care how they do it, whether they have to bend the truth or they have to lie. And frankly, President Trump is absolutely right to respond because you know what, Charles? Public opinion never sleeps. And unfortunately, if it says, there's no collusion, they're going to turn around and say, well, they interfered and somehow you had something to do with it. He has to shut them down at every turn. And unfortunately, it hurts his ability to govern the country because the Democrats are never going to accept the election results.
Ned, over the weekend, yesterday, Rush Limbaugh, he cautioned President Trump. He appeared on Fox News Sunday, and what he said was that by taking a victory lap, he could actually validate the whole process. I want to share this with you in the audience and then ask you about it.
I would be very careful if I were President Trump here. This is just one of many different areas the special counsel is investigating. The danger for the president is it would be very, I think, seductive for him to embrace this, totally embrace, say, see, I've been vindicated. The worst thing he could do in his world is to validate this whole investigation by claiming victory here.
Do you think there's some truth in that, Ned?
I do. I think that anything that Trump does to legitimize what I think is an illegitimate investigation with Mueller doesn't help his case. So I would agree with Limbaugh. I think the thing that's interesting, too, in this, Charles, a couple things. First of all, if these Russians who were indicted are guilty of conspiracy to defraud the United States, why is a former British spy by the name of Christopher Steele also not guilty of conspiracy to defraud the United States? And again, when he is authoring a fake dossier that was used as a weapon against Donald Trump, used by the FBI to secure a FISA warrant, how is he not also being charged with that as well? The other thing, too, that's amazing to me, Charles, is this disingenuous media not saying Trump isn't pushing back against Russia. Okay, I'm sorry he didn't tweet out something about pushing back against Russia, but when he's saying that that Poland and the Czech Republic can have missile defense systems now, which, by the way, Obama pulled out in 2009 to appease Putin, when Trump is selling arms to the Ukraine, which frustrates Putin, and at the same time, when he has gone into Central Europe and Poland last summer and started talking about undercutting and undermining Russia's exports of oil and gas, which is 50% of the Russian government's revenue, I consider that very strong pushback against Russia.
You know, Deneen, I mean, it's obvious, and this is we talk about this all the time, that the mainstream media will never, say anything positive about this administration. But having said that, it puts a lot of pressure on President Trump to have to use the Twitter as a soapbox and bully pulpit. In this particular case, were you happy with the tweet storm that he went off with yesterday?
Well, listen, the way I see it is that the president is always on offense, and you mentioned the media will not report anything positive about the president. They don't want to talk about the fact that there has not been any facts coming out in terms of Russian collusion with Trump associates and Russia. What the president is doing is going to Americans directly with his tweets, with his messages, because the media will not do so. And the other thing is he is pointing out that the thumb was on the scale in terms of Hillary Clinton with the election and with the FBI individuals. So they let her off. Huma Abedin with her emails, what happened with that, and the opposition research dossier. All of this information the president is reminding Americans about.
You know, Emily, also, this whole thing creates a timeline that goes back to 2014. We had Adam Schiff over the weekend even acknowledge that the Russians were emboldened because of a lack of effort by President Obama after the Sony hack, that they saw, hey, this internet interference is the way to go, and the United States won't push back.
Certainly, we can revisit mistakes made under the Obama administration. And I think, Senator Bernie Sanders said earlier this weekend that, maybe there was something the Obama administration could have done differently when it came to interference in the election. And I think that is a question that is going to pick up traction in the coming weeks, because especially if it gets pushed by Republicans on the Hill and elsewhere, because it's a question that we actually would be served by having answers to, and wondering what could we have done then and what can we do coming up on these midterms, because they're not that far away.
There's no doubt this whole thing, Ford, has not gone the way that Democrats or the media expected it to when it was launched. It's getting old in the tooth, long in the tooth, rather. And so far, 13 Russian indictments, not necessarily a lot to show for all of this. Where does it go from here?
Well, we don't know where it's going to go, because obviously Special Counsel Mueller has kept it close to the vest. I just find it next to impossible that after 14 months of no evidence of collusion that you're ever going to find any sort of collusion. What I hope is that we actually get to the bottom of Russian interference, because we're going to have a midterm election in 2018. What I hope also, though, is that Mueller sticks to the course of Russian interference and doesn't go down a rabbit hole and fall into the Democrats and the mainstream media trap, where this is all about getting Donald Trump politically. He is the duly elected 45th president of the United States, and the Democrats need to understand that. We need to move on and actually stop the Russians, and dare I say the Chinese as well, who are coming right up their backside.
Ned, I think you agree with that.
No, absolutely. I really would love to see John Brennan and James Clapper, who, by the way, were in charge of the CIA and Director of National Intelligence, in 2014, 2015, and 2016, and ask them, you were warned. What did you actually do against this? You were the guys that were in charge. I will say this, Charles, watching all of the intelligence heads last week give that briefing in front of the Senate Intel Committee, it's clear that there is not a plan to combat this moving forward. It's time to get a plan, and it's time to also decide inside of the intelligence community and the Department of Defense who's actually in charge of a plan moving forward. We're spending $28 billion in our government on cybersecurity. We should have a plan. We should be aggressive. I was encouraged by Mike Pompeo saying we have the ability to go on the offense. I would like to see us go on the offense against Russia and China, and let people know you cannot meddle with our elections moving forward.